Everybody, so I'm going to be talking about the Millikan oil drop experiment, and we're going to be outlining some of the questionable practices that Millikan took when publishing his paper on this experiment. So a quick overview, I'm going to be going over some facts around Millikan's experiment and telling the main ethical dilemma. I'm going to be talking about an ethical theory, act utilitarianism, and applying it to Millikan's decision. I'm also going to be using the National Science Foundation's Code of Ethics to analyze Millikan's decision. We're going to come up with 2 objections to the ethical theory, act utilitarianism, and then wrap it up with a conclusion. So first, talking some of the facts around Millikan's experiment and the main ethical dilemma. In 1915, Millikan published his paper titled On the Elementary Electrical Charge and the Avogadro Constant. And in this paper, he showed that the electron charge was discrete and had a measured value of 1.592 times 10 to the negative 19 Coulomb, which later won him the Nobel Prize. But when we look in Millikan's personal journal, we see that he only published about 74% of the data that he had got from these experiments. The data that he left out had some significant error to it and did not support his conclusions. But we can also see in his journal is that he explains the experimental discrepancies of why this error may have occurred, but still yet he never published this in his paper. It turns out that Millikan was correct. And if we look at the value that he got, has a percent error of about 0.64%, which is incredibly accurate compared to today's accepted value. And the main ethical decision we're going to talk about here is Millikan's decision to pick only data that support his argument without providing that data that was contrary to his conclusions. Moving on to an ethical theory, we can use act utilitarianism, and act utilitarianism focuses on whether a particular action causes the greatest good for the greatest number of people. We can argue that Millikan chose to present only data that was valid. Moreover, experimental conditions were as perfect as they could be for his setup. Additionally, the discovery advanced the frontier of knowledge and allowed for new research to be conducted based on Millikan's results, which ultimately led to advancements in science in general. In conclusion, we could say that according to act utilitarianism, Millikan was ethical in his decision to publish this limited data set since it was the only valid data, and it furthered the frontier of science and led to the greatest good for the scientific community. Now, using the NSF Responsible and Ethical Conduct of Research, we can see that on NSF's website, they have a page on responsible and ethical conduct of research, and it says that researchers must responsibly generate and disseminate knowledge with rigor and integrity. Well, Millikan chose to leave out data that didn't support his argument, and if he had integrity, one could argue that he would have published the invalid results with an explanation of why they were not valid. So his decision could be viewed as unethical under the NSF's Responsible and Ethical Conduct of Research. Moving on to some objections of act utilitarianism. The first objection, under deontological ethics, which focuses on actions based on established rules, Millikan's decision to leave out data would be considered unethical since it goes against NSF's Code of Responsible and Ethical Conduct of Research. The second objection is Millikan could have actually been wrong in concluding that some of the results were invalid. If this were the case, this would lead scientists to chase their tails conducting experiments based on bad information. In turn, this would stunt the progress of science. So if we view this from the lens of rule utilitarianism, which focuses on rules that lead to the greatest good for the greatest number of people, we can then conclude that Millikan's decision is unethical since other actions like this do not lead to the greatest good to the scientific community in general. In conclusion, the main ethical decision here is that Millikan chose to only select data that supported his conclusions. Under act utilitarianism, though, this could be viewed as ethical since his work was true and advanced science. However, if we look under deontological ethics and using NSF's Code of Ethics, he broke an established rule, and we can conclude that his actions were unethical. Additionally, under rule utilitarianism, if Millikan's actions were set as a rule for all scientists, then this would often lead to stunting the progress of the scientific community, and again, making Millikan's decision unethical. And here are the references I used for this presentation.